YouTube, what the crap's going on? HeirofCarthage here, back in Total War Rome 2 with an online battle, and this time it's going to be Lusitani versus Carthage. And I can't remember, I don't even remember where I did the faction focuses on. I'll have to go back and look and maybe see if I can get you some more of those. Unfortunately, it's going to be quite a bit harder since there's not as many online battles going on. Seems like the player population in almost all the Total War games is what I'm saying is pretty low right now. Unfortunately, and I think it's probably because of honestly, in my opinion, I don't think it has anything to do with the single player. I think people actually like the single player in Total War and have. I think it's the multiplayer, and because the multiplayer hasn't been focused on as much in the last couple releases, I think you're seeing the player populations be lower right now. We can always hope that improves over time, and I certainly do, because I'd love to have more people on Total War and playing these battles. So, I'm playing as Lusitani. My opponent picked Carthage. I don't really feel like Carthage is probably a great pick against the Lusitani. They certainly can win, and I'll just kind of explain why. The Lusitani are fairly light units for the most part with a poor missile block chance. They come with a lot of javelins and relatively high attack. So that's really where the Lusitani kind of factor in. They come with a lot of precursor javelins, access to as many Balearic slingers as they want. Where their weaknesses are is they only have access to medium melee cav at their best. So that's going to be a weakness for them, is when it comes to cavalry strength, they're going to be a bit lower on the totem pole. But the way that they try and make up for that is by throwing a lot of javelins. So their sword power is pretty good. Their weakness of their swords, of course, is skirmishers. Now, Carthage does have access to plenty of decent skirmishers, so they can face off against the Lusitani. And I kind of have my own ideas about the best ways to do that. But my opponent has brought, I believe, 4 Carthaginian cav. He has an African war elephant. His general is in a bodyguard. Up front, he's got 2 late Carthaginian hoplites to help in the cav fight. Not a bad plan to bring a hoplite, though I think a Libyan hoplite would have been sufficient. He's got 4 mercenary Iberian swordsmen up front, which I like, because he hasn't brought a skirmishing contingent. Those guys could potentially shield for his Libyan infantry that are behind. Now, Libyan infantry are not really a good match versus veteran shield warriors or Lusitani nobles. However, if he gets them into their shield wall formation, they can last quite a bit longer. So that's one possibility as well. But in the cav fight, we're basically evenly matched here between the Scutari and the Carthaginian cav. If my Scutari get a good charge, they'll win because they have a better... they both have a 15 bonus versus cav. My Scutari, though, should have a little bit better charge bonus, I think. Slightly. Let's see, 44 melee defense. Yeah, only 34. But I'm guessing the Carthaginian cav have more armor. Yeah, 65 versus 55. So they're very similar cavalry. Both medium. He's leading with this mercenary Iberian swordsman, so I'm going to actually use my Balearic slingers, and I'm going to focus fire. This is not a particularly high value target, but getting rid of these guys means that that's that many less javelins that can be hurled at my men, and my men are fairly weak towards enemy missiles. So this is a pretty good idea for me to try and maximize. So you're going to see me fall back a little with my main infantry. My own Iberian swords are going to trade javelins with them here, and this is not really a great trade for my opponent, because these javelins need to be used against my higher value targets like the Lusitani nobles. So I'm actually really happy with the trade I'm getting here. He's just killing some of my cheap Iberian swordsmen with his own, giving my Balearic slingers a chance to fire and fall back, and then focus on a new target. Now my opponent immediately flanks with his elephants and his cav. I get into a cav engagement with him, and my Scutari cav are going to get the better of that engagement, and then I'll just avoid his Carthaginian hoplites with these spearmen if I can. His elephants are going to make a beeline for my flank, and this is a good choice. However, the Lusitani, you'll see it looked like I was open to an elephant charge, but quickly I'm going to reposition for javelins here. I'm going to intercept this hoplite, and then I'm going to start setting up a ladder of Iberian swords, so one here, here, and here, all with javelins ready to throw. So these elephants will never make it through all the hail of javelin fire that they're going to eat. Elephants are a little too weak to javelins in the late game, in my opinion. They're a little too easy to stop. They are very powerful, and if they get in, they can cause horrendous damage to enemy infantry. And I'm kind of okay with that, because they're like the counter to super heavy infantry, since shot cavalry and melee cav aren't super strong. However, and I don't mind javelins killing elephants, I just think it happens just a little too fast. It was something I was hoping they would patch, but of course they didn't, and at this point I don't think we should expect a patch for Rome 2. So I engage over here with my my veteran warriors. My Lusitani nobles are going to go 2-on-1 here with some Libyan infantry. And then here in the center, I'm just holding a couple of veteran shield warriors and just destroying his infantry center here with Balearic slinger fire. And then I'm going to go 2-on-1 again here with my Lusitani nobles. So my Lusitani nobles can definitely handle themselves just fine in this kind of fight. And here my veteran shield warriors would have been better off getting a charge, but they'll do okay. My slingers are just sitting here absolutely wasting all these mercenary Iberian swordsmen, which again, it's not a super high value target, but it's going to keep these guys from being able to eventually get around my flanks. Now, my opponent is losing the cav fight on the flanks, so he's getting desperate now for a break. So he pulls his general through and gets a nice little rear charge on my veteran shield warriors. But this is going to allow me to catch him with my Scutari cav here, and that's going to be very bad for the Carthaginian bodyguard. And it's not quite enough to break my veteran shield warriors. If he would have gotten out and built up a little speed, I think he would have broke them. My Lusitani nobles, meanwhile, are doing pretty well, even in this 2-on-1 engagement against the Libyan infantry. They're holding their own, and then I got some more veteran shield warriors in here. See where he's trying to get his Iberians through the center. He's going to actually successfully get these 13 men into combat with me, but it's not a big deal. And then as I free up Iberian swordsmen from the flanks, I'm going to start to crash into the rear of the enemy with these units here. So my opponent blobbed up a little too much here. What I would have done as the Carthaginians, personally, is just, if you think about it, the Iberian sword infantry is made to kill other sword infantry. And they're weak to missiles. So I would have denied them the opportunity to get kills against sword infantry by bringing cheap hoplites as my main infantry line, and then just bringing a crap load of cav and slingers. And personally, I feel like that would have been the best way to counter the Lusitani here as the Carthaginians, as that would basically force the Lusitani into a fight that they don't excel at, which is cavalry. And then they're okay when it comes to skirmishing the Lusitani because they have these Balearic slingers, but if you came in with like a couple of Cretan archers and a few Balearic slingers, the Lusitani are going to be in trouble, because then they won't have enough money left for good infantry, and their cavalry won't be very good at that point. And again, the cheap late Libyan hoplites of Carthage can resist a lot of fire, and they will certainly not win against the Lusitani infantry, but they can hold them long enough for you to win the cav fight and start kiting your missiles, basically. So that's what I would have done as a Carthaginian player. I definitely would not recommend elephants versus the Carthaginians, or versus the Lusitanians. Unless you have a massive skirmishing advantage, but even still it's very tricky because all the Lusitani units basically come with javelins, and they are quite good with them. The Iberian swordsmen, for instance, are very cheap and come with 5 Soliferum javelins, and they are quite capable of destroying elephants. Now, he did get quite a few kills here, but you got to remember that those were basically on cheap spearmen and a couple of Iberian swords, so definitely not worth it for the elephants. As you can see, though, my Lusitani nobles were absolutely beasting it up. And then my veteran shield warriors, a couple of them were doing just fine. And then my Balearic slingers, of course, killing a lot of Iberian swordsmen. So not a huge return on investment in these guys, but again, basically keeping these guys from being any more effective. You can see, though, with javelins, this is probably just javelin kills here, how many kills these Iberian swordsmen can get. And that's not a bad thing. But if you imagine how few kills here these Libyan infantry got, you can see why I would suggest just bringing the hoplites, because these guys aren't going to get that many kills. So you might as well just bring the cheap infantry. So maybe, for instance, one way you could run it as Carthage. And it depends on what the Lusitani player brings, but I would maybe recommend something like this. In fact, you could even go with the shock cav general here, I think, if you want. I would basically just bring these late Libyan hoplites, like 6 of them. Bring some Iberian swords, and let's switch this to large funds, which is what the typical online battle's in. This would now allow me, look at this, look at the firepower that I can afford at that point. And you could maybe even cut back on a hoplite like that and go 5 hoplites, and then look at the money that you have left for cavalry, basically right here. I mean, you can field some pretty gruesome cavalry. So, maybe something like a couple of these mercenary Numidian nobles would be a pretty punishing choice. I don't think the Iberian cav could catch them, and you'd have your own mercenary cav plus a shock cav. This army, I think, would be pretty overwhelming for the Lusitani to face. Their Balearic Slingers would have a hard time cutting through 6 high-power guys. Yes, they could cut through your hoplites and your infantry, but by the time these guys do their javelin damage and these guys hold the center, you could cause a... And in fact, you could even use these guys in the center and just put your skirmishers behind them. These guys would be throwing javelins, your skirmishers would be firing, and then your cavalry would have the support of hoplites on the flanks, where the weaker Lusitani units tend to be. So I would definitely feel pretty comfortable bringing an army like this. And if I was going to place upgrades, you might could put a couple on your Scutari cav just to maybe give them a slight edge with the rest of your funds, and then perhaps put it on these Libyan infantry. They are throwaway, but the upgrades won't do any good on your skirmishers, just because your skirmishers don't really they don't really get many kills. You might put some upgrades on your general just to try and make him a little tankier. But see, I mean, you can afford quite a few upgrades. And make sure you would get your hoplites into hoplite wall if they come up against swords, because then they get a 5 bonus versus infantry. Wouldn't be great, but it'd be better than nothing, and it's their 80 armor that helps them out. So I would try an army like this. Yes, it's risky because the Lusitani could cut through you. Now, I would not recommend this army versus the Lusitani if it's a forested map, because then they will get cover and they can overwhelm you with swordsmen. This would be an open field battle versus the Lusitani. If you're facing the Lusitani in the forest, it's going to be a little trickier as Carthage, because all your cavalry charges are going to slow down. And if I were going to be a Lusitani player facing you in the forest, I would basically just bring an infantry spam, because cavalry are less effective in the forest, and then my guys would not be as vulnerable to your skirmish fire. So the Lusitani can be actually pretty dangerous in a forest. Not versus the Romans, but versus the Carthaginians they could. The Romans in a forest are really hard to overcome. Anyway, hope y'all enjoyed this one with a few thoughts there at the end. But yeah, HeirofCarthage signing off for now.